Welcome to VersoFest 2025, Verso Studios and Westport Library's annual music and media festival.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, let's hear it. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the final day of VersoFest 2025. I think we deserve another round of applause. It's been a long one. I'm David Bibby, and I manage the video studios here at the Westport Library, and what a day it's going to be. I keep having to recalibrate that it's not an evening. So there we go. So what a day. We're starting this event building up to this evening's Gang of Four Long Goodbye Tour kickoff concert. Yes, we're going to have lots of that. So this afternoon, we welcome a longtime friend of the library and a new friend to the stage to be in conversation together about a fantastic new memoir, To Hell with Poverty, a class act inside the Gang of Four, published by the equally fantastic Akashic Books. First up, Chris Frantz. Chris Frantz is a musician, producer, songwriter, founding member of Talking Heads and Tom Tom Club, a frequent guest of the library and the host of the library series Chris Frantz Presents. He also hosts the radio show Chris Frantz, The Talking Head on WPKN. His recent memoir, Remain in Love, chronicles his artistic and musical journey. Chris will join Jon King, author of To Hell with Poverty. I like the ring of that, especially in Westport. A poignant and dramatic memoir. Jon is the lead singer and songwriter of the legendary British underground band Go Britain, Gang of Four. Into Hell with Poverty, the reader is taken on an episodic and kaleidoscopic journey full of adventure from Jon's childhood to the end of Gang of Four's golden period, or the beginning of the new one, perhaps. In 1984, thrown off the hit British TV show Top of the Pops, beaten by police at an anti-Nazi rally, being at the heart of the UK post-punk movement in the 1970s, fraternizing with Hell's Angels and other undesirables, supported by bands like REM and playing with the likes of the Police and, of course, the Talking Heads. King's time with the Gang of Four is rich with stories. So, let's get into some of those stories, and I am honored to introduce to our stage, welcome Chris Frantz and Jon King.
Wow, thank you, and welcome. Welcome to Westport Library.
This is the first time I've been here, and the first time I've ever sat on a librarian's stage, so it's very exciting. It's very good.
I know, everybody says that.
It's amazing. And we're playing here tonight, so that's even more amazing. Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. Jon King, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. Let me just say that you're a singer.
Yeah.
Before that, you were a painter.
Yeah.
Now you're an author.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, I was originally studying fine art at Leeds University, and probably like 90% of all British rock bands, I studied art, and that inspired me to make music because we weren't very well supervised. And so we could do what we wanted. And so what I'm doing next, along with doing this stuff, I'm making artwork again. So that's my next thing. Yeah.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your childhood, which I was very interested to read about, because it was, my childhood was kind of like Mary Poppins compared to yours.
Yeah.
But born in 1955, good God, to be a working class in post-World War II London in 1955.
Yeah.
That was rough.
Yeah. I mean, we lived in a house with no heating, no hot water, no inside bathroom, well, no bathroom at all, and an outside toilet. It was in a bit of a state, and it was a slum that was due for demolition. So, around the corner was my grandmother's house, which was really, I loved her house because next door was a bomb site. Because lots of London was still covered in uncleared away places where the Germans had bombed. And there was this perfect circular hole from the roof right the way down to the ground where a bomb had fallen and obviously not exploded. And I loved playing in this thing. It was fabulous because you could just about crawl around the edges of the building up to the top and among all of this debris and kibble and mess from that. And so that was great as a child. And in our back, I was going to say back garden, it wasn't a garden, it was about half the size of this stage, and it had a wartime air raid shelter in it, which had sort of collapsed and was sort of inhabited by feral cats and things. But it was quite enjoyable in its own sort of way, except for Sundays, when we had a bath. Which was heated up on a sort of strange sort of range thing in the front of the living room. And I was second in the bath. So my brother was first. And the worst thing was to be last in the bath. Because it was like a kind of horrible, toxic loop. But, so it's a bit like Monty Python, really, I think. Yeah.
And you were a kid who loved to read. From an early age, you were very fond and even excited to read.
Yeah.
And this served you well because you became a good student, and you were able to get into a posh public school called Seven Oaks. Which changed your life. I think for the most part in a good way.
Yeah.
But tell us about that, the transition from the school you had been in. And you also speak about the inequality of the education system in Britain, which we have some of here as well. Go ahead and tell us about that.
In Britain is a really class-bound society. It was then and still is, but it was particularly noticeable in the 60s. And I went to a normal primary school up to the age of 11, and there was an exam which was called the 11 plus because you took it at the age of 11. And it was full of curious questions which are very sort of class-bound. One, I think, which I quote in the book, was a woman is pulled out of a river, but she doesn't say thank you to her rescuer because A, she doesn't feel grateful, B, she's unconscious, and C, she's embarrassed at the company or something like that. And you have to, one of those is the correct answer. And I'm still not sure which one it is. Because I was from a working class family, my father was an electrician, and we had moved on a self-build program, which was very common in the 1950s. The government had encouraged people to build their own homes. And so we lived in this small, very, very boring and dull village. But because I was a reader, and I would say libraries made me, libraries saved my life, so I'm really pleased to be in this room. We had no books at home. We didn't have a book at home at all. We had no record player at home. We had a heating system at home, but we couldn't afford the oil or the coal to heat it. So we had an unheated house and all this stuff, but I did have books. And I read and I read and I read and I read. And I loved American comics, and I loved any book I could find. And so when I came to do the 11 plus exam, I passed this thing. The reports on who got through the exam were, the reason for not passing it, rather, was having an inadequate vocabulary. And that really meant not being middle or upper middle class. And now I'm speaking to you in an estuary London English accent. I probably had a sort of Cockney accent when I was up to that age. And so we use different words. And in Britain, the words that you used immediately identify you in your class. For example, I had never heard the word lunch before. I was 11. We didn't have lunch. We had dinner. And we didn't have dinner in the evening, we had tea. So if you said, I'm having my tea, you immediately identified yourself as working class. And I also spoke in, I think, a Kentish dialect. I said, instead of saying 25 past, I said 5 and 20 past, or 5 and 22, like you might read in Charles Dickens. And I went to this very posh school. I got a free place as a result of passing this test, and kind of like a scholarship. And I think I stopped saying 5 and 20 past in about 5 minutes, with all these posh boys laughing at me. And my accent was transformed so much that a week later, after starting there, my father said to me, how come you speak so posh? I said, I don't know, Father. Papa, what do we say? But so it was an interesting encounter, and it really did transform me. Being among uber privileged. And for those of you who haven't spent much time with British people, everything that we say in British English means the opposite. So I was at a public school, which means I was at a private school. There are no... So that was that. And if someone says to you, something is interesting, then really they hate what you're doing. And so I went to this school, and I went to school 6 days a week. And we worked and worked. And at the end of the day, because I didn't have anywhere to work at home, I was in the library. So the school library was where I was in there 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, doing my prep, which is, of course, the posh word for homework. So again, the different vocabularies are there. And so I navigated my way among the super privileged. And it was a great, great blessing, yeah.
And one day, you're on your way to school, and you actually literally bump into John Lennon on the street.
Yeah, yeah.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
And the other Beatles were following along
around.
too, right?
Yes. Our school was having its dining hall block built, and for a short period of time, while the construction was taking place, meals were provided in the local cinema. So it was like a Meals on Wheels thing. But because the school was very violent, I mean, we got beaten the whole time and hit routinely by teachers and by other pupils. It was very violent. And if you, at the age of 11, arrived too late for lunch, you're pushed out of the way, and you often never got any food. And our teacher took pity on us and allowed us to leave early. And me and two friends ran as fast as we could down so that we could finally get a lunch in before we had to sort of slink back. And I physically ran into John Lennon at the age of 11 in the most boring place in the world, Sevenoaks. It's really, really dull. It made East Germany look glamorous. And ran into this guy and looked up, and there was the most famous man in the whole world. And I was thinking, John Lennon, Beatles, food, John Lennon, Beatles, food. So we ran off for the food, obviously. And it turned out they were filming the Magical Mystery Tour stuff in Knoll Park. If you go onto YouTube, you'll see the filming of them larking about around a piano with lots of strands and things on it. My school surrounded this amazing place in Kent with this Elizabethan building in the centre of it, and our school was like founded in the 17th century, so it went on and on and on. And it turned out that John Lennon had just left the antique shop, which is about 10 yards away from where I ran into him, where he bought a poster. And the poster read, "For the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampoline." And he bought the poster, which he pillaged for the words for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And that was utterly amazing. I mean, I couldn't believe it. One of my wife's friends saw the row of the Beatles minis parked up later on, and wandered over to see one. And there was Paul McCartney sitting behind one of these things, and she tapped on his window. She was only 11, and he slowly wound the window down like this, and he went, "Piss off."
Sir Paul did that?
So it wasn't a night then, so that...
Well, I love your chapter headings, the titles of each chapter. For example, there's a chapter called Psycho Teachers, Qu'est-ce que c'est?
It's an homage.
Yeah, I love that. And then comes cigarettes.
Oh, yes.
And sport.
Yes.
And then sex.
Oh, yes.
So tell us about sex.
Well, when things are different now, I mean, I think it seems to me that as soon as children are potty trained, they're looking at hardcore pornography. But I mean, in those days, I wasn't really sure about the geography of the female form. I had no idea at 11 or 12 what that meant. And friends would sometimes bring into work copies of catalogues with adverts for brassieres on them, and we'd look at them very intently to absorb the information. But the thing that was the most helpful thing to us all was a magazine, which was the house magazine of, I think, the Nudist Association. And it was called Health and Efficiency. And it had pictures of sporty boys and girls in the buff, you know, playing beach ball or table tennis and things, you know. And you thought, it can't possibly have been filmed in England because you'd be too cold. And it rained all the time. But so there was this magazine, and we'd stare at it, and all of the lady gardens and things like that were all airbrushed out. But we looked really carefully at these things, and that's how I learned about sex, until we had a class from one of our horrible fascistic teachers who was very embarrassed by the whole business. And he drew up a picture of a rabbit, 2 rabbits, and a little female sign, you know, with a circle and the cross on it, another one with a circle and a little arrow. And he said, this is a female, and the buck mounts the doe, and semen is emitted, and sexual congress takes place, and that's called sexual reproduction. The same happens in humans. And I thought, that's disgusting. So that's how I learned about sex. Yeah.
I don't think I ever had a class about it.
Oh, well, that was the totality of it.
And my father told me about sex. Chris, don't believe what your friends tell you. They're probably exaggerating. Yeah. But we did all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, very importantly, at Seven Oaks School, you meet Andy Gill.
Yeah.
The guitar player and co-founder with you of Gang of Four. And that was fortuitous. But he was a year younger than you, so maybe you weren't particularly close then, or were you?
I was in a very small, gifted group of people who were all in the art department. There was less focus on uniform conformity and less violence in the art department. In my year was a guy called Kevin Lysett, who became the guitarist in a band called the Mekons later on. And in the same year in my class was Paul Greengrass, who directed all the Bourne conspiracy movies later on, and Adam Curtis, the documentary filmmaker. And the year below was Andy Gill, my guitarist and co-writing friend, and Mark White and Tom Greenhalgh, also in the Mekons. So we were this little cluster of people at this school who were very competitive with each other. But we then formed very strong social relationships around that. I made the mistake of speaking to the head of the art department. I was then 17. I thought that he was rather strict about his son, Mark White, the singer of the Mekons. And I said to him, I think you're being, over cautious about your son. You should let him express himself. I knew all this bullshit, even by 17. And he said, okay. And I said, what do you think I should do? And I said, I think you should let him come to the pub. We all obviously went to the pub, even though it was not legal. And he said, you must look after him. And so I had the task of curating Mark White. And I figure, this is very good advice to all adults, that the best way to curate a 16-year-old boy is to let them do whatever they like. And that's what I did. And but Andy and me and Mark and Kevin and Tom Greenhalgh and Paul were all just buddies, really, and it was good. Yeah.
Your art teacher was a fellow named Bob White.
Yeah. Who
teaches you to really look at things, because when you're an artist, you have to really use your eyes.
Yeah.
Or what? He also taught you about thinking critically.
Yeah.
And I had a similar experience with my own art teacher when I was 15 years old. And this changed my life, as I'm sure it did yours.
Yeah.
Because I was also at that time a pretty posh school for my community.
Yeah.
And most of the people were expected to become professionals.
Yeah.
Not professional drummers or professional painters.
Yeah.
It gave me a whole new kind of confidence. Like, I could do this.
Yeah. And I think at 17, 18, we'd be talking in loose terms about things like the Frankfurt School, and Marcuse and things like that, and which were, stumbling your way to sort of thinking about the power of culture and the power of thinking critically about ideas. And I loved Marcel Duchamp at that time, and I was really sort of thinking how clever it was that he could turn a urinal upside down and sign it "Ah, mutt," and then transform it into something that was art. I mean, I think in current terms, I think culture will save us all. If we're all going to do anything, it's culture. And I think that was really important. And it was Bob White who encouraged me to go to university. I was the first person in my extended family to ever go to a university, to go to an art gallery. My father never set foot in an art gallery. I never saw him read a book, but it was so interesting. And the more you read about something, and like we both studied art, the more you thought about what it was that it meant. And I still look at pictures and wonder what they mean and try to decode them, or what the artist might think they might mean. But when I was 18, I went to stay with a friend in Buffalo, New York, and I thought Buffalo, New York was part of Manhattan. And I thought my friend, was an idiot, because his girlfriend's family were in the oil business, and her father had got a job in Oklahoma City. So he got a job in Buffalo, thinking he could be close to her. And I thought he was a nitwit, and I said, oh, well, I'll come over to stay with you for a while in Buffalo, because I wanted to go to the Museum of Modern Art and places. And obviously, it wasn't there. But they had the Albright Knox Gallery there, so I went there. And then we went down to DC. It was a fabulous place. And then I hitchhiked up to Philadelphia to see the paintings of the Arensberg collection, the Marcel Duchamp stuff. This is at 18. And then up to Manhattan, where I stayed in the Chelsea Hotel with my last bit of money, and then did go to the Museum of Modern Art. And I did see the great art collections and Guernica and things like that. So it was quite interesting how thinking about art then makes you think about life and think about culture and think about music.
That's right, yes. So you go to university in Leeds to study art, and Leeds is a great town for seeing and hearing live music.
Yeah.
I can remember the first time we played there, which was with the Ramones. We were supporting the Ramones.
I saw you.
everything was great. It was great. But they had a stage that was kind of like these big cubes. Do you remember this stage?
Yeah.
And when we started playing and the fans rushed forward, the stage
Started moving.
got pushed. Got pushed back till we hit the wall.
Yeah.
Lively audience there.
Very lively.
And another gig we did there with Tom Tom Club was one of the best gigs of my life, I must tell you, at the Brunel Social Club.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just, the audience was wild.
Yeah.
And it was the night before we were to play Glastonbury.
Yeah.
And the guy who ran the Brunel Social Club was so nice. He bought us all wellies. He said, "You're going to need wellies."
Yeah.
He took our shoe size, you know.
Oh, that's nice.
Really nice. Nice people.
You're the only people I know who had wellies on your rider.
Yeah.
We have Pouligny-Montrachet. They have wellies.
Yeah. So you're in Leeds and going to university, and Andy Gill shows up.
Yeah. Andy was in the year below me at Leeds, and we had adjacent rooms in this really seedy building. And he and I, were having great fun as great friends together, and had started writing really comic songs together. He had an acoustic guitar, and I had a cassette recorder, and we'd sing these songs into this thing, which was a kind of a lark. I mean, Andy, when he first went up, had never lived away from home before, and his mum had always looked after him. And so he embraced, for a while, a lifestyle rather like Withnail and I. And the room that he was in, he was too lazy to walk down the corridor to take a pee. And he used to urinate into these litre-sized old orange juice bottles, which he actually thoughtfully did put the cap back on. And then he would array them around the wall. So it was really horrible. But we moved forward. We carried on our great relationship, and it was at the end of that year that he and I went to New York in 1976 to hang out.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
How about the other two members of the band, David Allen, Dave Allen, may he rest in peace, and Hugo, who's here tonight.
Yeah, hooray! Yeah. Well, Andy and I had been to New York, and we were staying in St. Mark's Place with Mary Harron, and we were talking about her earlier on, and how we got sort of waved into CBGB's, and we saw everybody who was then sort of trying to make their way, and it was so interesting to see this New York-based music, which was, really proud. You have a band like Television, with some naming himself after Verlaine. You sit there thinking that was fantastic, or Patti Smith doing her thing, or Talking Heads doing their thing, and of course the Ramones, the most intellectual of them all. So it was such a thrill to me to be in this place, and Gil and I were there, and because we were there so often to CBGB's, people thought we were in a band, and someone said, "What's the name of your band?" And Andy said, "We're called the Mudflaps." And so I thought, oh. But as we came back, we thought, yeah, maybe we should have a band. We didn't have any songs, we didn't have a drummer, we didn't have any equipment, and we weren't really very good. But we thought it was a good idea. And we came back, and we'd already made friends with Hugo. And Hugo was a drummer. And we said, what do you think? And the three of us decided to start a band together. And it turned out that Hugo was a sensational drummer, rather like Simon Kirke of Free, because a band that we all really revered, and of course Charlie Watts. So he played in that kind of way. And we knocked together really quickly a bunch of songs with a guy who was actually a jazz funk bass player called Dave Wolfson. And we played I think, one or maybe two shows with him. But unfortunately, he was a really good musician. and we really weren't. And what we wanted was something that was quite empty and stark and more like something from Delta Blues or Chicago Blues, maybe, something really, really empty. And it didn't work out. And Dave Allen, who sadly died a few weeks ago, came down from the Lake District where he lived, where he'd been in a show band, and they played everything from country and western hits to funk to pop and all that stuff. And he was a really accomplished musician, but he got the new thing. And I'm not sure that's exactly what it was that we felt about the new thing. But he and I bonded over the meters. We were talking, when I met him, we talked really animatedly about Sissy Strut, and the greatest band I think ever out of New Orleans, the Meters. And so Hugo and Dave really hit it off, and they became the engine room of the band. I mean, and it only allowed me and Andy to do our thing by having such a great drummer and such a great bass player who could play funk, and we liked Can and bands like that, so he could play stuff that wasn't decorative, and so Hugo and I became lifelong friends, and he's here tonight, and he's lovely. There he is. Stand up, Hugo.
Well, you mention in the book that you really didn't expect to ever be in a full-time rock and roll band, and on top of that, you had absolutely no desire in becoming famous.
No, I mean, I quit the band once Damaged Goods thing came out because it was too successful. And I didn't want to be in a band, I wanted to be a painter. And I was doing quite well, and I'd got to the regional finals of the Windsor and Newton Young Painter of the Year thing, and I'd won a couple of painting prizes, and I thought, this is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be in a band, it was a nuisance. But when I saw the painting that went towards the finals of this competition in Sheffield's Mapping Gallery, it just looked like a painting. And I just wanted to change the world. That was my sole ambition. And I wanted to change the world by making something that was culturally important. Because I felt that there's, again, talking about both being working class in a posh environment, being transformed by those sorts of opportunities, by being transformed by books. All of those things made me think, and the rest of us think, changing the world was the most important thing that we could do. And it was a very politically febrile time. None of you may recognize a culture where fascism is on the rise, where there's violence in the streets. I mean, this unusual, specifically British experience. But it was really, Leeds was a very dangerous place. It was the home of organized fascism in Britain, and had been since the 1930s. It was a very difficult place with a lot of anxiety and danger. And I felt the best way to do this was to be in a band, to take it on. I thought, that's why I thought I'm going to design the covers, design the artwork, I think the best way to change the world was to do something that would get over to a lot of people. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
The name of the band is so kind of perfect. Who came up with that?
Well, Andy Corrigan, one of the singers of the Mekons, Mark White, the other singer, and me shared a flat in Leeds together. And we were struggling for a name, and Corrigan spotted a headline in a newspaper, and it said, "Gang of Four on Trial." And he said, that would be a really good name for a band. And we said, yeah, why is that? He said, because there are four of you. So that was it. Yeah. So Corrigan had a great sense of humor, and I steal his jokes from the Mekons. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Mekons, but the banter is very funny, and I currently steal his joke, which I won't do tonight necessarily, which is introducing the guitarist and saying, here's a young man down from police college, has just learned his way, you know, and then you introduce Andy Gill, you know, or whatever. That was a Corrigan joke, yes, yeah.
Tell us about the importance to the Gang of Four of the Buzzcocks and the Mekons.
Yeah. Well, we struggled to get shows. So at the very beginning, it was quite hard to divide the people who were in the Mekons and Gang of Four socially. We all hung out together. We did things together. We constructed our own PA system from Second World War parts. We didn't have any money, and there was a radio spares store which had some driver units from British aircraft in the Second World War. We used to broadcast to the troops. And so we think it used to say, Berlin ist gefallen, der Führer ist tot, from these things. And so we unscrewed the armor plating of these things, and we constructed a PA system together as a kind of cooperative. And it was really fabulous. It sounded like one of those reggae sound system type things. And so the Mekons Gang of Four Collective did this until we actually tried to get it out of the door, because it was too big. So we had to cut it up, yeah. It was very like Spinal Tap, the whole thing. But hustling for gigs. Dave Allen was our hustler because he had a payphone. None of us had a phone. He had a payphone. He phoned and phoned and phoned. And there was the Buzzcocks, who were then really just about starting to happen, were played somewhere nearby. And Dave managed to persuade the promoter that we could turn up and see if we could play. And we turned up, spoke to their manager, and he said, yeah, you know, go on, but you know, make sure you get off. And we played our set, and Richard Boone, their manager, actually watched what we did. And a week after that, we got a telegram. In the book, I have to explain what these complicated things are. And it said, Buzzcocks European tour, stop. Want Gang of Four, stop. That was the message. So we were then supporting the Buzzcocks in Europe. And then we came to this breakthrough tour of the US, where they were touring over here, and said, do you want to come and play? We used to play with them so often. We'd sleep on Pete Shelley's floor in Manchester when we were over there. And Pete was really kind to us, and Steve Diggle, really good. We came over to the States, and when we were supporting them, we'd do our turn, and the days off, we'd play double shows. So we went all across America, playing more or less every day, but sometimes twice a day. So we played like 35 times in, 25 days or something. And we got quite good. And, but the Buzzcocks were just fantastic to us. And really, I mean, Pete, again, R.I.P., he wrote some of the finest pop music ever, really. And it was wonderful, yeah.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to see them at Toad's Place a few years ago.
Yeah.
A sound man that we worked with a lot was with them. He said, come on up to see the Buzzcocks. And I went, and it was really fun.
Oh, yeah.
Really great.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't new anymore, but they were still great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry, I have to refer to my notes, otherwise I go off.
No, yeah.
Okay. I saw this band when they first came to New York and played the Bottom Line, and like every rock and roll band was there that night. And you mentioned what a source of inspiration they were to you, and that's a band called Dr. Feelgood.
Yeah.
And particularly the singer Lee Brillo and Wilco, the guitarist, Wilco Johnson.
Amazing.
What a whirlwind.
Yeah. They came from a very deprived part of Britain. It's Canvey Island, which if you ever go to London, don't go to Canvey Island. It's just, you know, falling apart industrial buildings and oil refineries and things. But it produced this amazing band who played what used to be called R&B. Obviously, the R&B now is turned into something else. But it was a stripped down thing where Wilco played actually like Delta blues musicians. If you see him, he flicked the strings. He didn't play it in a technically accomplished way, but it was, he used it on stage almost like it was a dagger or a spear. He would have this stone face and he would careen across the stage, stabbing the audience, and then flicking the strings like this, and making this jagged up and down vigorous noise. And Lee Brillo was the singer who wore this suit which had once been cream-coloured, and it was covered in tobacco stains and beer and stuff, and he'd have a fag in one hand and a pint of beer and a harmonica there, and he'd be singing like this, drinking like that. But they would play this amazing music, and if you ever listen to their great album Down by the Jetty, which is sensational, and it is like, it thrilled me like listening to Delta blues musicians, and or obviously the of all rock music, Robert Johnson. You know, so you know when you listen to that stuff, you know that they're doing it because it matters to them somehow or other. The lyrics were ridiculously rubbish, but it was such a thrill. I think I must have seen them 6 or 7 times. And I mean, Andy was transfixed by Wilco, and I mean, his entire lifelong stage act was an homage to Wilco. And we were, years later, we were at some awards ceremony, and I was sitting at a table, you know, everyone's queuing up, and I had Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, who was a great hero of mine, sitting next to me, and you know, chatting idly to Jimmy, but what I really wanted to do was talk to Wilco Johnson, who was on the table over there, and I wandered over to Wilco, and I put my hand out, and I said, Wilco, and I was shaking, I said, we owe everything to you. And he looked at me like, you could see him thinking, what a wanker.
Yeah. Well, you know, he probably didn't have very good manners.
He was lovely, yeah. And he ended up in Game of Thrones, didn't he? Wasn't he?
He may have been.
I think he was in Game of Thrones.
Oh, good for him. Good for him.
Yeah.
We played some festivals with Dr. Feelgood. You know those festivals in Belgium?
Oh, yeah.
I forget the...
Pink Pop?
Oh, yes, Werchter, correct. The promoter's name was Herman Sherman.
Was he German?
I was standing behind Dr. Feelgood, watching them play, you know, from the wings, such as they were.
Yeah.
And you could actually see cattle grazing just beyond the audience, you know. Those were the days when festivals were like fun.
Yeah.
You know, and cheap.
And cheap, yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the importance of John Peel, famous DJ.
Yeah. John ran the only, at that time, the only program on the radio which played indie music and reggae music and interesting avant-garde music. And if you got on his show, you had an opportunity to be heard, because no one would play our music at all. I mean, it was just, you know, I do admit it's not, Anthrax is not enormously commercially friendly, but John was really kind about that, and he played our stuff, and we were a little jealous at the time. We mentioned the Mekons. The Mekons had released one of their records called Where Were You, which is just a masterpiece. And it's a big clap from that guy. It's fantastic. And they played that, and the Mekons, I think, slightly hustled to get us on John Peel's show. And so we got a session. And once we had a session on that show, everything went nuts. Because basically because we were played on the radio, because there was no other way of hearing what we did except there. And I think because we like listening to reggae music and funk music, I think people saw that there was something between these white guys playing a guitar-based thing, but with this other stuff in, without trying to sound like the average white band. And I think that resonated. And Jon was incredible, really. And he was a nice bloke as well.
Yeah, I never met him.
Yeah.
I don't think he was interested in Talking Heads or Tom Tom Club, because we never got that invitation.
Oh, I think you're just too good.
We were deprived of John Peel's notoriety.
Yeah.
But I know he was an important figure.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that you got into the rock and roll business because you felt like maybe I could change the world. And then this concept or movement called Rock Against Racism came about.
Yeah.
And I think Gang of Four was a big part of that. Could you talk a little bit about how that went down and what the results were?
Well, again, you know, it might be something that Americans are surprised by, to see organized fascists attacking black people. But this is what was happening in Britain. And at that time, there was a political party called the National Front, who were hard right people who were really opposed to any person of color having any kind of role in society or being given their civil rights. And Eric Clapton had publicly declared his support for one of the leading racist politicians in the country, which led to a great backlash among the musical community. And we were one of the first bands to say we've all got to do something about this. And I mentioned earlier how culture can change the world, but music can change the world. And we then participated in this thing where typically you'd have three bands, sort of like a basic, not basic, but a traditional punk rock band, if that is such a thing, a reggae band, and then some other type of band. And we toured all around the UK on these things with Misty, who were then a reggae band, and the Ruts. And we played shows all the time. And in Leeds, we played so often that we were almost seen as the house band of Rock Against Racism. And these were, they were really, really significant. And in fact, when the right-wingers put up a load of candidates in the election, they didn't get a single seat. And the organizer of it said that the reason was we made it uncool to be people holding these opinions. And it was all about solidarity and progressive ideas. And I'm really proud of it. I mean, I think it was a movement that won. We won.
Bravo. And then there was Rock Against Sexism.
Yeah. We were a bit uncomfortable about being an all-male group. Actually, when Sarah Lee joined after Dave left, we then became a mixed-sex group. But I think one of the most influential thing to me was finding out about feminism and the whole notion of how the patriarchy worked and how our society was structured and all that stuff was very important to me. And in my lyric writing, I wrote a lot of things that teetered around those topics. And so there was a daughter movement of Rock Against Racism called Rock Against Sexism, which tried to do something. There wasn't really an organized party to fight against, though, in that case, but it was about trying to express different ideas about sort of masculinity and the like. And we sort of struggled to think how we could be more right on. So when we did a show once, we had the support band with this all-woman group, and we decided that although we were headlining, we should go on first. So we did this so that the women could get the attention. But unfortunately, everybody left after we did it. So I think I said in there, sometimes doing the right thing isn't the right thing. But feminism was really critical, and I talk about Leeds. Leeds was a very dark place for women. The worst serial killer in British history, so-called the Yorkshire Ripper, killed 12 women during the time that we were there. And the police were uninterested in solving this crime until he killed, in inverted commas, an innocent student. That was the police words. All the women were innocent because they were sex workers, but the police were not interested. And Leeds was the centre of the Reclaim the Night. That's where it started. So the women's movement and feminism was really important to us, and that's why we, when we could, we did things to raise money for Rock Against Sexism. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you came to America with Gang of Four, and by the way, you mentioned that Ian Copeland was our Talking Heads agent. He was never our agent, but he probably told you he was.
Oh, really?
Our agent was a guy named Frank Barcelona, who was also very successful. But Ian Copeland was a very sweet guy. I remember him. Much sweeter than his brothers, by the way.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's so. What a tour nightmare. Your first tour of America, and you're given a van by your agent, Ian Copeland, and it's in New York City, and you're headed to Philadelphia, and the van breaks down in the Holland Tunnel.
Yeah. And
like
it breaks
right in the middle of the tunnel.
On a Friday afternoon. Yeah. Our first show. And we're towed out, and we're parked up at the entrance to this thing on the New Jersey Turnpike. I'm wondering what to do. No one's got a phone, of course. There's no way of knowing what we're doing. And we didn't have any money, and we had to get down to Philadelphia. And so our stage tech, he thought, I must try the car again. And it started. And we drove about 30 miles down the road, and it broke down again. It turned out that Squeeze, who'd had the car till the day before, had poured sand in the gas tank to sabotage us, which was obviously very funny. And our manager ran off to find a phone in a motel that we could see from the hard shoulder of the motorway. And this stoner hippie and his girlfriend was sent from Philadelphia to pick us up. And we piled into this tiny little camper van with him smoking loads and loads of blunts all the way along the way. And we arrived in Philadelphia. There were the cops there, in and outside the building. There was the fire brigade at 20 to 1 in the morning. And we had 20 minutes to play. And Pylon, who became our great friends, and they played 2 sets, the same songs. They only had 8 songs in a different order. And we turned up, and we used their backline, which was fantastic. And then, because the next day we came on the train up to Boston with just drumsticks and 2 guitars, and to play at the Rat Club, and our support band was Missioner Burma, and so they lent us their backline. So it was only the 3rd show that we actually used our own equipment.
Yeah, we played the Hot Club with Talking Heads. Wasn't it triangular? I seem to remember that it was
It was the Rat Club we were at.
Oh,
the Rat Club was even more seedy.
In Boston, but before, in Philadelphia.
The
Hot
It was
Club.
in the corner. That's right. Yeah, the Hot Club. Yeah, it was.
We played there a couple times, and it was one of our favorite places at a certain point in time.
One of the things that writing the book came to me, everywhere that we're talking about and our memories, they've all gone. You know, I think the Hot Club has disappeared and is now a hotel. Yeah. Where the Rat Club was in Boston is now a Ramada Inn. The Tropicana in Los Angeles is a hotel. Where we recorded entertainment burnt to the ground, destroying all the masters. It's sort of like a black cosmic comedy. You know, Dante could have written our script, really.
Irving Plaza is still there. That's where I saw you, and it was really a great gig, sensational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was. That was a fantastic venue, wasn't it? That was really good.
So I guess my final question before we take some questions from the audience is there likely to be any new recording from the Gang of Four?
No. This is our last tour, and this is the long goodbye, and I think we're going to leave it as it is. We're going to play 2 sets. We're going to play the whole of Entertainment, song, track by track, and then Best of the Rest. And rehearsing, you know, we have in the band Gail Greenwood from Belly, and we have Ted Leo on guitar, and the greatest drummer over there, apart from Chris. And what is slightly depressing is that some of the songs on the album are still relevant. Guns Before Butter, All This Talk of Blood and Iron is the cause of all my shaking. I mean, it is a bit depressing that this might have some relevance to what's going on. But it's a thrill, but it will be the end. It is the end.
I understand. Questions from the audience?
If anyone has a question, we have time for just a few, but I do ask that you come here to the microphone so that everybody can hear the question.
Blimey.
Boy, college radio me is freaking out right now. So you've mentioned your philosophy and viewpoint of life so colored your art, your creativity in both art and music. Who's doing that today?
I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know. I mean, I think in dark times, people have got must put their heads up and start competing. I don't know who it might be. I think Beyonce is pretty good at fighting a certain corner of what it means to be a black woman working in the music industry. I think there's some sides to that, but I don't know really. I think when I was talking yesterday with friends about the say in the 60s, you had someone like Kenny Rogers would would have a great hit song, you know, Ruby Don't Take Your Love to Town, about a paralyzed Vietnam War veteran who's unable to deliver in the bedroom, and his wife goes out to get laid. Or Elvis, you know, In the Ghetto, or Love Child by the Supremes. I'm just thinking of that back in the 60s. And I think that a song like Ruby Don't Take Your Love to Town now would probably be self-censored. I mean, the lyrics of that are so profound and so mainstream. They were mainstream, and now I think they're possibly seen as being worrisome. But that song could be a really current song or something like that now. But I can't answer that. I don't know. It's a very good question. Yeah.
This is very specific, so pardon me for that. But on the song 545, the Entertainment, there's a bit where the whole song stops. And then you repeat the single phrase again and again. Guerrilla War Struggle is new entertainment, and it gets louder and louder and louder and builds up. How do you guys think to actually do that in the song, if you remember? How you had the idea of doing this, stopping the song, saying one phrase again and again and building it up to this big climax?
Well, I mean, when I wrote the words, I was always trying to write without an authorial voice in there, of course, and to try and make it like what the thing is that you're writing about. And I think sometimes the most radical thing you can do is to describe the world as it is. And of course, Guerrilla War Struggle is in New Entertainment does come on over and over and over again, and again, regrettably, now. And the opening line that's part of the entertainment body. How can I sit and eat my tea with all this blood flowing from the television? I mean, now I stop watching the news. I can't quite deal with it. But it was an attempt to sort of, in words, to describe what it was to just see this thing over and over and over again. Yeah. That's a bit depressing, isn't it?
Hi, my name is Nick Tampio. I listened to entertainment. I discovered it when I was 14 years old and listened to it over and over again. And maybe unlike some of the great punk rock albums, I kept going back to it. It's kind of been a soundtrack. And so I just thank you very much for doing this tour and performing for us. When you were talking earlier, you just said in a line, "Culture will save us all." Yeah. And I would love to hear you elaborate.
Well, I think that it's quite difficult to. I mean, I'm not a politician, so I don't really know about that sort of thing. But I think if you are trying to make the world a better, a more progressive and thoughtful place, then you have to embrace some deeper ideas about what it is to be alive and a human, and that happens in the cultural experience. You know, when you hear music that moves you, you start thinking about the depth of it all. I mean, you can't listen to Muddy Waters really without thinking about what it must have been like to live in Chicago at that time, or to be part of that great diaspora from the Delta up to Chicago and elsewhere, or Detroit. So I think culture is a thing that drives us all. I mean, obviously here I am sort of really spouting Marcuse back at you, but I do think that, and I think that's why I was drawn to things like situationism, which toyed with culture and détournement and all that kind of thing, which obviously I ripped off on the cover of Entertainment. The idea that describing the world as it is radical and might lead to something else. There may be, and there still is, a beautiful city on a hill, and that's what we can all do with culture, is build that city on a hill. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, so I have a question about songwriting. I was curious what advice you would give to, I guess, specifically younger songwriters, especially interested in, say, like the sound of Solid Gold, the second album, and yeah, I guess tapping into that sort of like darker sort of sound.
Well, on Solid Gold, I mean, like many of the tracks, almost all of the tracks were built up on what Hugo and Dave Allen did. So they, on one of the tracks on Solid Gold is What We All Want, which is, it just goes boom, 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 and it's about the one. I mean, if you like funk, it's all about the one. And if you're in rock, sometimes you're thinking about the four, and you're not thinking about the one. So trying to get the one into it. And we worked with Jimmy Douglas, who'd worked with a lot of AOR and mainstream acts, but he also worked with a band we liked called Slave. And so we were talking about the one all the time. And having what Hugo was doing with Dave, which is play this relentless, non-changing funk beat, which, I think it's had legs. I mean, I was really pleased when Run the Jewels were using some of our stuff, and Frank Ocean years later. And I think it's because it's that sort of repetitiveness of it all. And then Andy freewheeling over the top of it, and then my stuff. And I think the one thing about writing that is really unoriginal is to try to write something that's really quite specific about something that's actually happening and that matters. I think of that great Blondie song where the opening line is, "I'm in the phone booth, it's the one across the hall," which is a fantastic opening. You know exactly where you are. And sometimes when you listen to songs that people write, you think, you could be anywhere. And one of the anywheres is, of course, the technology we use makes everything sound nice. And who wants to make nice music? I mean, that's my advice, is don't make nice music.
Sweet. Thank you.
Hi. I saw you when the Slits opened for you at Irving. Oh my God, it's one of my top 10 shows. And Chris, I saw you when WPLJ, you played in Central Park in about 1980. So anyway, question, two of the best top 10 shows. How do you had mentioned Rock Against Racism, which I remember because I was in London a little bit in the 80s, and you said that it made being political and revolutionary cool as opposed to Nazism. We're here again in the States. How do we make it cool again to be progressive? And that's
Well, I think it's a hard thing, but I think if people come together with a shared purpose and don't speak in cliches with each other, I think that's, if you adopt the vocabulary of your opponent, then you've already lost, I think. I don't know if that's a good answer.
It's hard to answer, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Just depressed here.
Yeah. What I noticed though, Rock Against Racism, I described the time I got truncheoned down by a cop. And it was, you saw at that time, immediately, who were your friends and who were not. And I think it's find your friends. I mean, that's, find your friends, yeah.
Well, I think we have a bunch of your friends here in the audience, so let's give Jon and Chris one more round of applause.
Thank you, Jon.
And I know that everybody is super excited to get their books signed by Jon, so just give us a little time to get him to this table. And if everyone could line up here behind the chairs and then to the table, that would be fantastic. Just give us a little bit of time. Thank you so much.